All right, guys, it is primaries in many states across the country, but I'm in California, so that's what we're going to talk about. So, the first thing I want to talk about is kind of my disappointment with some of the candidates. You know, for one, many of the candidates to a lot of the voters just weren't all that impressive. So that's kind of what's dragging the turnout. For the age range between 18 to 34, the turnout is just really low, especially for primary, especially in California where it's a jungle primary and the top two have to move on regardless of their party. And so it's kind of shocking that the turnout's been kind of low for the younger demographic for voters. And so I think part of that is, again, this the crop of candidates on both sides, but definitely on the Democratic side, just haven't been that great. But I also looked at some of the candidates that, people thought and knew that they weren't going to move on to the general election. The Matt Mahans, the Katie Porters, people that are, known in California, but not really known to and weren't expected to move on to a general election. And those people just decided that they're not gonna drop out, to kind of coalesce behind two candidates to make it easier in the general. But they decided to spread out the base and spread out the electorate, which is an issue, which is why it's looking very likely that there will be at least one Republican in the general election come November, and that probably will be Steve Hilton, the Republican endorsed by Trump. The question really is who will be the other person. Javier Becerra has a decent sized lead, not a healthy one, but a decent one. I think it's like a 6% difference between him and the next candidate on most polls. So the question really boils down to who will be that other person. You know, Many people want to see a progressive in, in a place like California, a really democratic stronghold. But the question really is, do they really want a billionaire to be that progressive? You know, some people feel like they want someone who's a safe candidate like Javier Becerra, but they feel like his interests might misalign with some of the electorate. So that's the question that we're looking at tonight, and so we'll have more answers in a couple of hours to decide who will be moving on to the general election in November. Stick with us all English for more, and I'll have more to come soon.